Hello, and welcome to Journey to Justice. I'm Eiko Kosasa, your host. Recently, I interviewed Toni Bissen, Executive Director of Pu'a Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve communities. Toni says that community work is a process where people discover their gifts and bring them to the table in order to move forward collectively. In this interview, Toni talks about Pu'a Foundation's project, Huliao, in the women's community correctional facilities. I began the interview by asking her where she was born and raised.
My full name is Toni Grace Cecilia Kalinohulihe'i Bissen, and I actually married a Shinto. So my family name is Bissen. We're the Bissens from Maui. My father was born and raised on Maui. My mother, her last name is Lum. We're part of the Lum Fong Ohana on my Chinese side, and she's from Oahu. I was born here on Oahu, and I grew up in Mauna Lua, or Hawaii side.
Oh, and so where did you go to school then?
Yep, I went to public school. Yep, I went to Kamiluiki in Hawaii Kai, and then I went on to Kamehameha, where I graduated.
Okay, great. Can you, this show's about how do people come to political consciousness, so I'll ask you that now, and I don't know if you want to talk about, from your small kid time or however,
Yeah, it's interesting. When I thought about that question, when you sent me some information about it. My mother is a social worker by profession. She was one of the first Native Hawaiian women to get her master's at the university, and this is back in the late 60s and the 70s, along with my auntie, who were the first two Native Hawaiians to go through a master's program here at the university. But they were sent because they worked in, they provided services for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and they were, they wanted to, what administration wanted to do was send some young women to further their education and go out in the field and apply some of that. And so when I thought about what really political consciousness or what inspired me, when I was little, I always watched my mom, and she sheltered me a lot from it. But as I grew up, we were always talking about certain kinds of issues related to her work as a social worker, working in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and with families. And I guess education was always stressed. So I became a lawyer. And coming out of Kamehameha, we always were, to some extent, given some information about what kinds of issues we face here in Hawaii that are unique here. Some from a political perspective, but just in general, from a social, economic, and political, as well as a cultural perspective. And just learning a lot initially from my family, and then going on to Kamehameha, and then I graduated here at the university and went on to law school in Washington, D.C. But when I was here at the university, taking classes from folk like, oh gosh, it's been a long time since I went to university.
Daviana McGregor.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was Daviana, and she was kind of young at the time too when I was in college. But she taught us and kind of shared with us about the struggles of Koho'olave and things like that, and inspired us to think through like what could be done. So actually, why I went to law school was because I thought, gosh, we have to help the Hawaiians. We have to get educated, and we have to, like my mom before me, kind of see if we can be of service in our community. So that's why I went to law school. And I guess, I graduated in 1993, and I came home, and what was the pivotal year of the 100th commemoration of the overthrow that happened in January of that year. So I guess it's been just my lifespan from when we were little, kind of getting involved in all of these different kinds of issues and learning about things and thinking how, to be part of the solution or how to be part of service and things like that. But
so did you practice law? when you came back?
Yes. My first job out of law school, actually, I worked at the Native Hawaiian Advisory Council. And it was a nonprofit organization that really worked in the area of water rights. And our big case at the time, in the early 90s, the water code was a very big thing that was being pushed through. And so water rights and Native Hawaiian rights and sovereignty rights and those kinds of things was really what I was passionate about. And at the Native Hawaiian Advisory Council, our biggest case was part of the Waiholi Ditch case at the time, and we were part of General Counsel. Our lead counsel at the time was Judge Walter Heen, who was off the bench and he was retired, but he became part of a legal team that we were working with. And so I learned a lot through that huge David and Goliath, which a lot of the issues about water rights and practices, Native Hawaiian gathering rights and those kinds of things were implicated a lot in what that case represented. So I did that for a few years. I was in private practice, and I also was a legal aid attorney. And so I was practicing for, I guess, about 7 years or so. And then I was asked to be part of the Pu'a Foundation as an administrator and executive director, and that's what I currently am doing right now.
Would you like to share with the audience what the Pu'a Foundation is, or their mission?
Sure, You know, the Pu'a Foundation, we're a nonprofit organization that was established by, it first started with the United Church of Christ. The United Church of Christ is the Calvinist or the Protestant church that trace its roots back to 1820, when the missionaries came to Hawaii from New England. And so the current day predecessors to those missionaries that came is now called the United Church of Christ. In the early 90s, the late 80s, the early 90s, the United Church of Christ really kind of examined their role as an institution in the 1893 overthrow, and they came out as a church body, and they were made up of a local church body, which is called the United Church of Christ, the Hawaii Conference, and then there's a homeland ministry, which represented their church body in the United States, and then there was a world ministry. So their organization actually came out and provided an apology, redress, and reconciliation initiative for their complicity in the overthrow, their church's complicity. Things like church buildings, leadership were all involved and intertwined historically with things that were going on during that time in 1893. And it's just fascinating.
It's amazing that they like owned it, right? I happen to be Catholic, but how I kind of compare it to the Catholic Church when they kind of took responsibility for the scandals involved in, molestation cases. And as an organization, as a church body, they came out and took responsibility after a lot of litigation and things like that. But similarly, the Protestant church here, the Calavinas, which is the Hawaiian word for Calvinists, so they're the Calavina churches, the Calvinist church, which is called the United Church of Christ, they came out as a church body to take responsibility for any complicity in the overthrow. And so as a result of that initiative on the part of the church, they created a large apology, redress, and reconciliation plan. And out of this larger plan, a nonprofit organization was founded and created. And that's the organization that I run. We're a 501c3. And what our work has to do with is really community healing and well-being, and trying to reconcile the past to the present, to get together as a community we can build a better future. So that's what I do now. And I went on your website and I looked on the mission, and it's particularly to the 1893 overthrow, right? I mean, that's like the point of like trauma or big incident, right?
We kind of, our mission is kind of long, and it really, it encapsulates this notion of reconciliation. But we trace our birth, or how we are hanao. The Pu'a Foundation was hanao, gave birth out of this initiative. So that's why we kind of because of how we were born in that initiative, we really kind of trace it back to and have some relations to that historical event in time of the 1893 overthrow of our constitutional monarchy. So that's why we kind of put it in those terms. But the broader aspect of what the intention is of the foundation is really about community healing and well-being. This notion of historical trauma, if we want to call it that, really to reconcile the past to the present, so as a community we can build a better future. So all our programs are really aligned with that. And just the name of the foundation, Pu'a, that means feeding, nourishing, and strengthening. It literally is masticated food that's exchanged between like a mother and a child. And our logo is two birds, and it has that meaning of how birds feed their young.
Yeah.
But the kauna, or the deeper meaning behind the name, is about feeding, nourishing, and strengthening. But in this larger context, about reconciliation.
Yeah.
So that's some of the work that we do.
That's amazing. I know one of the things you do is you go to the women's facilities, the prison facilities.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Can you talk about the programs you do there?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, as an organization, the vision and the aspiration of the Pu'a Foundation, again, was this notion of community healing and well-being. And so, as a Hawaiian organization, we were founded to be a Hawaiian organization, just as its creation and things like that. But our board and the vision of our organization really is about Hawaii and serving the Hawaii community. So we chose kind of through different kinds of initiatives that we've had, because we were founded in 1996, we were incorporated. And so we were running different kinds of programs, but over the last 10 years or so, there was a conscious choice on the part of the board of directors to really refocus and try to develop concrete programs that really service as this tool or venue for healing and reconciliation. And so back when we were actually founded in 1996, the board of directors really identified as the prison population and having programmatic activities related to the prison population. So just within the last 10 years, there has been some focus on that. So we have a project called Holiau, or trauma-informed care. And what that has to do with is just understanding this notion of what trauma is. So I was placed on a team, along with our organization, was placed on a team that was put together to really look at creating places of healing, or a pu'uhonua. And within the larger vision of creating a place of healing, or pu'uhonua being a sanctuary, there is this notion of how trauma or trauma-informed care could be part of that, and that framework that could be utilized and aligned with creating a place of healing, or a pu'uhonua. So we've been doing a lot of work there. So we assist and partner and put some resources into working in the forensic community, we call it, because we've also done some work in Halava with the men, and we also are outreaching to working with family court, and also outreaching to work with the youth facility through the Office of Youth Services.
Right. Who are the forensic community?
You know, it's funny because we were, our team, our trauma-informed care team, there's an organization under SAMHSA that's called the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. And they put together a conference of different kinds of folk who are working with trauma-informed care systems in the mental health area, in different areas. And there was a team of us that went up to Baltimore. And when we got there, and we said where we were from, we're from the Women's Community Correctional Center, and we have this project called Trauma-Informed Care. And they said, oh, you guys are from the forensic community. And we said, what? And then they explained to us, I guess in the mental health area, they refer to any criminal justice work, or those working with the criminal justice system, and with incarcerated individuals, as the forensic community. So we just thought that was a commonly used term, so now we kind of use it a lot in describing our work, the forensic community.
I have to think about that. Yeah, because it seems like this
CSI.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting.
So yeah, that's why it's actually a large part of our work, our Huliao or transformation program under the foundation, and working with the forensic community, and creating places of healing, kind of doing a lot of facilitative work on that journey, creating places of healing.
Can you go back and talk about, when you're talking about trauma-informed care, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's for the last 20 years or so, it really began as a movement in the mental health field, and trying to address how trauma has, and the recognition of trauma should be addressed. What seems to be commonly used is post-traumatic stress disorder, and that notion of trauma. Usually when you see kind of a natural disaster or a victim of war or things like that, that you have this trauma and how it affects your mental state or your well-being. So this notion of trauma is pretty established in that context. But the mental health providers has really done a lot of studies on different sources of trauma, and the development of how there is this movement to understand from a patient perspective or a consumer's perspective that the essence of trauma or an experienced trauma really had its origins in what your condition is right now. So at its core is recognizing, being trauma informed, recognizing the potential aspects of trauma. And it's really expanded because trauma informed care really provides a framework to understand that from a holistic perspective. If not only the consumer, but as an institution, you can also look to understanding and training your staff, because your staff, and sometimes especially in the forensic community or looking at a facility like the Women's Community Correctional Center, if we look at the ACOs in terms of adult correctional officers, and really identify or discuss this notion of what trauma is, you know, being from that perspective, from your staff, and when you have to do certain things like, whether it be a strip search or a takedown or things related to your job, you could consider that as stressful or traumatic.
Yeah.
But having a perspective that your institution or your practice is trauma-informed care, there are techniques and policies and practices and procedures that really address how that can be handled, not only for your staff, from your consumers who live there, from administration. So it's more that kind of that ability to give you flexibility to recognize as an institution what trauma can do or its impact. And it's just really, it's a really good tool.
Yeah, because it kind of puts everybody sort of on the same page, or like you're all together,
absolutely.
And this is what we're going to do. It gives them answers, like you're saying, for the correction officers and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not end all be all, but it's another tool for an administrator to kind of think about being trauma informed. It also provides these techniques where your consumers or those who serve, you can be a lot more engaging and have them participate in their healing process. And it also really encourages and enhances that ability if your institution is trauma informed. And there's a lot of things that are published about it and things like that, but just not only that we're looking at this perspective or this framework of being trauma informed in the perspective of having a prison, but it's really important to have the alignment that this notion of being a pu'onua or creating a place of healing and incorporating a trauma-informed framework is much more effective. And because I think we're, you know, this notion of the Pu'a Foundation really wanting to be part of this community healing and well-being, reconcile the past to the present, so together we can build a better future. Strategically, working in the forensic community and servicing and being a part of a public-private larger initiative and larger team that focuses on our women who are mothers and are incarcerated, and taking this perspective of this larger vision and aspiration to create a place of healing, a pu'onua, and having a framework of trauma-informed, and then systematizing also from a holistic perspective incorporating this notion of mind, body, spirit, place, and systematizing and operationalizing it even more. And we call it creating a space for healing. And we use the acronym SPACE as looking at staff, programs, administration, community, and environment. So there's been a lot of thought and a lot of developmental evaluation and a lot of activities in what we've done together. It was definitely a team approach in that particular project.
So you were part of, like, with the warden and other people to conceive of this?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's very important to bring in community. There's this notion of, the government has the solution and the responsibility to take care of our public safety issues and running our prisons and, the incarceration population. It's not our job, it's their job.
Yeah.
And that's incorrect, because it's all our jobs. And ineffective, it is unrealistic to think that government alone can figure out issues like public safety, like the issues related to incarceration. So the warden of the Women's Community Correctional Center does a lot of community building and a lot of outreach. They approached us and they said, we want community to be involved in this kind of initiative. So I was part of a leadership team and an implementation team. Actually, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs funded this initiative. And it really came out, it was a partnership with the Department of Public Safety, the University of Hawaii, the Department of Health. We were kind of a team member from community, and it was really a public-private partnership. And a team was created to think about how we could, implement something like trauma-informed care. So that particular project probably started off late 2008, 2009. And it went for a few years, and it continues, and it's growing, and it's more of an ability to have community engaged in being part of the solution and taking care of our community, our forensic community.
When you're naming the different partners, normally you're not going to get this result of Pu'a Honua, because it's like, well, in my mind, I think of the agencies, they're going to think of some other kind of bureaucratic kind of answer. But so it's amazing in a way that this is, it came out with this wonderful thing of healing and, conceptually how it's based, like Pu'a Honua. And I can see that with the trauma is the way into to help make this place a place of healing. If not, trauma is just this individual thing only, instead of looking at the whole facility can be that. I mean, that's very inspiring.
Well, I think, Warden Mark Patterson is a wonderful leader. He's an inspirational leader. And really his vision and what his calling is he really thought, with all of his experience in public safety, and starting from the ground up, up until he achieved the level of where he was administration and a warden, he really learned a lot, and he thought to himself, if he had to be the one to look at being part of a solution, especially when he was assigned to the Women's Community Correctional Center, there weren't too many security issues, but this was a place where women were, and because of the research that we did, there is a tremendously high percentage of women who experience trauma that really have been the underlying causes in their journey to prison. And so recognizing that and trying to create solutions, and this vision of having a Pu'a Honua, which is an ancient, it's how we ran in traditional times. There were places during wartime that existed where you could get sanctuary, and you could be, removed from the community, and have a timeout, if you will, and then re-enter community. Yeah. So we're taking Ike Hawaii, or our traditional knowledge, and bringing that into contemporary times. And there's a lot of information, or there's a lot of different kinds of initiatives now that are, can prison be a place of healing? Can pu'onua, the concept of pu'onua, be utilized in the criminal justice system now? So there's some legislation just recently being passed and some discussions at the legislature right now. Ted Sakai, who's the department head of PSD, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs has really developed some initiatives to look at this notion of how pu'onua could be, in contemporary times, useful alternatives. So the initiative that we've been doing really has lended itself to a greater initiative moving forward. So things like community building and partnerships, working together to be part of the solution, looking at different kinds of models is something that really came out of some of our work that we did at the Women's Community Correctional Center.
But I know you go there, do you go there every week or you on a regular basis? So you run some, what do? You run programs there? What are they?
It's funny, I guess again, it's, there is, what the program that the foundation runs, it's called Huliao. It's and working in, it's called Huliao Transformation and Trauma-Informed Care work. And so as part of that project, and starting on the leadership team of the Trauma-Informed Care Initiative at WCC, it has expanded into doing many kinds of things that are facilitative in nature, community building. So some of the initiatives that I'm involved with happen to be activities, bringing community resources into the Women's Community Correctional Center, and I'll give you an example. There's a Hawaiian cultural series that we're part of that brings in different kinds of experts, if you will, that teach certain kinds of things that may be helpful at understanding perhaps cultural interventions, and not necessarily based on exclusively for Native Hawaiians, but just cultural knowledge that might be helpful in one's journey of transformation.